Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being here tonight. For those of you who don't know, the Berkeley Forum is an entirely student-run organization, from marketing efforts to reaching out to speakers to physically executing the events. Every aspect is student-run, and we're very proud of what we do. The overarching goal of the forum's work is to promote free expression on our campus and to discuss ideas that really matter. Today, we will be hosting Marie Haga, the Executive Director of the Global Crop Diversity Trust, an organization that aims to ensure crop diversity for the purpose of global food security. They are internationally recognized for their ex situ conservation towards keeping plant genetic resources available. The Global Crop Diversity Trust is one of the managing organizations of the Svalbard Seed Bank, located in Norway. The seed vault is uniquely built into the Arctic shelf and hopes to preserve a wide variety of plant seeds. Tonight, our moderator for the evening will be Jackson Wrigley, but now I welcome Marie Haga to the stage.
Thank you very much, Katja, and thanks a lot for having me here. It's great to be at Berkeley. I'm looking forward to this. I'll give a little presentation, and then we'll have questions. So I really hope we can have an interactive little session. All right, so we'll be speaking about seeds today. Seeds, yeah, that's basically it. Thinking about the world without seeds is basically unimaginable. You know, the clothes we have, it's basically from seeds. Here's wood in the chairs. The trees out there, flowers, landscape. You know, it's all practically based on seeds. And not the least if we speak about what we eat. You know, your coffee here, your morning piece of bread or your cereals, your tortilla, your sushi, your soup at night, your vegetables, the fruits you eat during the day, the beer, the wine, your nightcap, even your meat, you know, it basically has its origins in seeds. Seeds are miracles. Seeds are really miracles. It's amazing what seeds can do. Now, we'll speak about these seeds in a broader context. But only this today related to food security. We will start out tonight speaking about climate change, because I think it's fair to say that agriculture, farmers, those who produce our food, they are facing the biggest challenge ever due to climate change. The International Panel on Climate Change, they have said that for each degree the temperature increases on the globe, agricultural yields will be reduced by 2% every decade. That is actually quite significant. We know that the number of natural catastrophes worldwide is increasing, probably due to climate change. There are more droughts, more forest fires, more flood, more storms, more earthquakes, you know. It's quite significant. And this is what those who produce our food don't like, because this is instability. Things change rapidly. If we go to a couple of the crops that contribute substantially to feeding the world. If we just look at maize and wheat, here some scientists have had a look at what is happening to the yields when we compare it with what has happened during this time of climate change between 1980 and 2008. You know, it's quite dramatic how yields have gone down. We are roughly 7 billion people on the globe right now. We will be 10 billion in another 30, 40 years. In only 20 years, we'll probably be 2 billion more people. And, you know, if we then compare these two trends that I've talked about now, agricultural production going down and the global population growing, it just doesn't add up. Yeah? If we are concerned about food security, this just doesn't add up. It is quite dramatic. If you look at the pressure on land, you see that in 1960, per hectare, we fed 2 people. In 2030, we will probably have to feed 5 people from the same hectare. And of course, you know as well as I, we live in a time of land degradation, of urbanization. We also use plants to a larger extent for biofuel, which I think is excellent, but you know, it has consequences for food production. So we have tremendous challenges ahead if we want to feed the world. And it's not optional to feed the world, ladies and gentlemen. That is really not optional. What we got to do is we need to produce more food, more nutritious food, on less land, with less water, with less pesticides, with less fertilizer, generally with less environmental footprint. That is what we are up to. And the question is, can we do that? Yes, of course we can. Thank you. Because there is of course no single answer to how we do it. Let's that be clear. And don't interpret me to say that there is a single answer, that this is easy either. If it had been easy, it would have been done. But clearly, there is this one natural resource that we have not at all utilized to the extent possible. And that is this diversity of crops. There are several million crop varieties worldwide. It is actually one of the most important natural resources that we have. One of our most important global common goods. And hardly anybody speaks about it. That is strange. But anyway, it is. And this natural diversity within and among crops is really the raw material that we need to develop plants with new traits. All right, so, you know, globally we have, do you eat carrots? You know, there are 2,500 varieties of carrots globally. 3,000 varieties of coconuts. Yeah, coconuts, of course, is an interesting one. You know, I speak about seeds. Not all of these crops I speak about really have the traditional seeds, like wheat. Wheat is the grain, and you put it in the soil, and here comes this beautiful wheat up. Coconut is funny because, you know, the coconut seed is the coconut. It's as big as your head. You know? It's terribly difficult to conserve it. We can speak about that later if you want. But this coconut seed, it can float in the ocean for 3 months. Then it comes up on the shore. And when it comes up on the shore, it sprouts very easily. So it's terribly difficult to conserve. But there are 3,000 varieties of coconuts. There are 4,500 varieties of potatoes worldwide, most likely. 35,000 varieties of corn. 125,000 varieties of wheat. 200,000 varieties of rice. We at the Crop Trust are concerned to conserve each one of these 200,000 varieties of rice, because one of them might have the trait that we need in the future to adapt rice to higher temperature, higher salinity in the soil, to fight a new pest, to fight a new disease, to manage drought, to manage submergence, whatever. So we desperately need to conserve these building blocks. That is really what crop diversity is, the building blocks for the future of agriculture. We have lost a tremendous amount of diversity in the field. That is due to many factors. Certainly the way we do agriculture these days is the main reason. Nowadays, we also lose diversity because of climate change. Here are some examples. If we go to the US, these are not our numbers. These are FAO. No, wrong. This is OECD numbers. But in the US, you have lost 90% of fruit and vegetable varieties since 1900. 93% is actually what OECD says. Go to China. They have lost 90% of the rice varieties that they had in the field in 1950. So they only have like 10% of the diversity out in the field as they used to have in the 50s. And these are just some examples that you see here. This goes, across the board. So we have lost a tremendous amount of diversity in the field. Now, our job at the Crop Trust, and this is where we come into the picture, our job is then to conserve all existing diversity. And what that really is, it's conserving options for the future. This diversity really represents the options for the future. This is the raw material that the breeders need to develop by natural breeding the plants that we need in the future. Our job is to collect and conserve this diversity in plant gene banks around the globe. This word gene banks is not a nice word, really. So if anybody could come up with a better word, I would appreciate that. But what it is of course only, it's seeds that are stored, and they are either stored in aluminum foil in a cold storage, or for some of these plants then that don't have seeds, you can store them in test tubes. We also store them in liquid nitrogen, some of them, so-called cryopreservation. But the most common is, of course, that we store them as seeds, quite simply in aluminum foils, big racks of seeds. I'll show it to you afterwards. But that is our job then, to conserve this extremely important natural resource in plant gene banks around the world. We can also conserve seeds in the field, but that is more complicated. Our mandate is to conserve in plant gene banks. That doesn't mean we don't think it's important to conserve in the field, but a much more complicated thing to do. Now, as we say here, we can't retrieve what we have lost, but we can protect what we have. And we got to be sensible enough now to make sure that we give ourselves as a global community these options for the future. One fascinating thing about crop diversity is also that we are globally fully interdependent. No country has all genetic diversity. Even in the US, you have only like 10% of the crop varieties that are found in the world plant gene banks in their collections. And when breeders also in the US then develop new plants, they need genetic material from all over the world. So a new variety of wheat was, for example, developed, and one used plant genetic material from 26 countries around the globe to develop that wheat variety, which is called Viri. Has a fair strong stem, gives good yield, is an excellent variety of wheat. Governments have been wise enough to develop a treaty which allows us to share germplasm around the world. It's called the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture. What a wonderful name. But that allows us to exchange germplasm across borders. 135 countries have ratified the treaty now. The US has signed it, but not ratified it. We encourage them to do that. Of course, what we are after with all these conservation efforts, it's not to create seed museums. You know, plant gene banks are not meant to be seed museums. The whole idea is that it's being used by farmers and breeders and scientists. And at the end, what we're after, all of us, is to make sure that farmers has the best material that they need to produce the food we will eat. I will just give you one example of how this connection is between farmers and plant gene banks, because at times we are accused for not being good enough at explaining that connect. And let me give you one example. Cassava, do you know cassava? Yeah. Cassava is a real cool crop. But it has its origin in Latin America, in Colombia most likely. Now cassava is being grown in large parts of the world, very widely in Africa, but also in Asia, and not the least Thailand and Vietnam. In Thailand, they started to grow cassava at increasingly higher altitudes, and suddenly this root disease struck. It was about to wipe out all of cassava in the region. And of course, then scientists were trying to find a solution to this. And the solution to that root disease in Thailand was found in the plant gene bank in Cali in Colombia. It was this variety that was completely randomly collected in 1967 that solved the problem, the root disease problem in Thailand. And that's the way sort of this system works. Okay. Crop diversity is a prerequisite for food security. That is now also finally being recognized globally. We have excellent language now in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals related to exactly that. It's in Target 2.5 for those who want to know that. We are working in the Crop Trust to develop a global system for conservation of this diversity of crops. That has 3 layers: international gene banks, national gene banks, and we have a global backup in Svalbard. 11 major international gene banks that do hold the most important collections in the world. We are managing those international collections now, upgrading them, and getting them up to standard, introducing quality management systems, etc. We are also now identifying what national gene banks that need to be a part of this global system. Here is a picture. Well, that's a little bit difficult to see now, but that's a picture of a traditional gene bank with seeds, aluminum foil with their seeds in the cold storage. Now, the fact of the matter is that many of these national gene banks particularly, they are at risk for various reasons. Lack of money, but that can also be war situations. It can be natural disasters. The pictures you see here, not very well, is from the National Gene Bank in the Philippines that first was struck by a typhoon and then by a fire. We have lost complete gene banks in Afghanistan. We have lost complete gene banks in Iraq, to mention a few. That is why it is so important that we have developed the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. We are in Svalbard, an island. We are in Europe, top of Europe, Norway. And in between Norway up there and the North Pole, right in between, you have this island called Svalbard. Up there you have 12,000 reindeers. You have 3,500 ice bears. You have 2,000 snowmobiles, and you have 2,000 people. That's all there is. And one seed vault. And in here we have now 865,000 accessions of seeds. Oops, yeah. You see just boxes and these are just boxes of seed. Racks, racks, racks of boxes of seed. If you can read this, it says ICARDA on these boxes here. ICARDA is the International Gene Bank in Aleppo in Syria. This gene bank in Aleppo holds some of the most important collections of wheat, barley, and a few other crops. Everybody understands that the plant gene bank in Aleppo in Syria cannot operate. We have, due to the war, we have been working with them for 5-6 years, and we have copies of almost all of the material from ICARDA now in Svalbard. For the first time, we have taken seeds out of the vault. 30,000 accessions of seeds have been taken out. We have taken them partly to Morocco and partly to Lebanon. And so we are now re-establishing the plant gene bank in Aleppo in these two places. And this explains what the Svalbard Global Seed Vault is for. You know, if things go wrong around the globe, the idea is that we can go here and retrieve the material. So the ideal situation for us is to have a copy of each of the varieties of the major crops for food security up here. It's an insurance policy for the world. Here, oh yeah, these are farmers from Peru, from the potato park in Peru, delivering their seeds. In the Crop Trust, we have done a major rescue operation worldwide to safeguard material in plant gene banks. We did that together with the Gates Foundation. We are doing a huge project on what we call crop wild relatives, which is really cool. Crop wild relatives are the wild relatives of the domesticated species. It can be, for example, a wheat growing on top of a mountain. It might not look like a wheat. It might not give any yields. Might look very funny, but it is genetically a wheat. When that wheat has lived up there on the mountaintop for maybe 2,000 years, it's likely that it doesn't need much water. So we have now negotiated agreements with 25 countries around the globe where we have identified that it's likely that we find these wild relatives. And we are now training people, having collecting missions, going up on top of the mountain to find that damn wheat. We can hopefully solve the problem of wheat, and wheat requiring less water in the future. So these are the kinds of things we do. Very practical things, extremely practical. And we have huge data systems, of course, because again, we don't want to have seed museums. We want this material to be used. And the more we know about these seeds, and we spoke about genomics down here a little while ago, I'm not going to say more about that now, but of course, the more we know about seeds and what traits they have, the easier it is to use them for farmers. You know, our job at the Crop Trust, and the last I'm going to say, is also, it's not only to create the global system for conservation, it is also to fund this global system, because governments do understand that this is an extremely important natural resource, and it cannot be left to uncertainty. Today, it is partly left to uncertainty because of lack of money. And you know what? To keep this global system running, it only takes $34 million a year. We are hoping to have that in a forever perspective. That means we are building an endowment fund. And in order to have those $34 million a year, we need an endowment fund of $850 million. That is, of course, a lot of money, $850 million. Even I understand that. But just one example. I love soccer. We've been discussing soccer here, and which is, of course, different from American football. Soccer, I love soccer. For the World Cup in soccer in Brazil, there were built 12 soccer stadiums. 12 soccer stadiums. The one soccer stadium in Brasilia, which is the nicest one of those, but that one soccer stadium in Brasilia cost more than $1 billion. So making sure that we safeguard one of the most important natural resources on the world cost, ladies and gentlemen, in a forever perspective, less than the soccer stadium. I think the world can afford that. This is what will guarantee our food security. So we're working on that day and night. I just come from a pledging conference in Washington. We made good progress. We will now have 300 million in our fund, so we're getting up there. But we are, of course, encouraging governments and private sector to contribute to this. The beauty of this mission is that it can be done. You know, it is not rocket science. We know how to do it. And making sure we safeguard this forever costs less than a soccer stadium. Yes, let's just do it. Thank you. Do you want me here now?
Now we will be hosting our moderated component with our head moderator of the Berkeley Forum, Jackson Wrigley.
They don't want to hear me talk. They want to hear you talk. Thank you very much for being here with us. It's really an honor to be on stage with you and discuss this really important issue. I'd really like to kind of start talking about your context of your career and how you moved towards now working at the Crop Trust. And you've had a long career in politics in Norway, and you worked for various different positions in the Norwegian Minister of Affairs, and you were the leader of the centrist party for a while. And so what was the change from politics to now working for this Crop Trust like, and how has that affected you?
Well, I think to explain that, I've got to say that I'm born on a tiny farm in Norway, and my first job was to grow cabbage. So I sold cabbage, I grew cabbage, and I sold it in the neighborhood. So there has always been an affection there for agriculture, clearly. Now, I decided to go into foreign service before politics. So I was posted actually at the Norwegian mission to the UN in New York. I was posted to New Delhi. I found this life in foreign service, working with different cultures, very rewarding. Then, for some funny reason, I became state secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
It just happened.
It more or less did, yeah. And then that was an entry point into politics. So, I spent also another 12, 14 years in politics in Norway, including being party leader. And we established a new government alternative, actually, in Norway in 2005. Lot of fun, 24/7, damn hard work, lot of confrontation. Of course, as politics is. I always wanted to go back to international work. And I was asked to be on the board of the Crop Trust. The background for that was that I did help out when the decision was made in the Norwegian Parliament to build the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. So there was a connect there. But then I was asked to be on the board of the Crop Trust. I just found this extremely fascinating. And not the least coming from politics. And there are so many things in politics. These are perennial issues. You don't really get things done. There's no end to things. And then the beauty, again, of this mission is that it can be done. And working on something that is achievable is absolutely wonderful. And so now I was on the board, and I was out of politics. They needed a new executive director. I said no the first time. When they came back the year after, I said yes. And I have not regretted that at all. It's just very, very fascinating to work on it.
Yeah, definitely. I was talking to you a little bit before the event, backstage, so to speak, about how awesome it is for humanity to finally get something right. Like, we so often talk about different problems, and this is a solution, which is a little refreshing, honestly. But I'd like to kind of ask, before we get into the meat or the seed of the conversation, I'd really like to ask you. Sorry, that's awful, but.
I thought it was good.
So you spoke about, though, how it's not an option to feed the world, and to me it seems like, honestly, we're not feeding the world. So why can you elaborate on why it's not an option? Because it seems like it is an option, and we've picked it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess I should have said it shouldn't be an option to feed the world. But of course, also today, We have somewhere between 800,000 or 800 million and a billion that is not fed properly every day. So yes, we have our challenges today, and that is completely unacceptable. And it's just going to be more difficult in the future. So we need to find these game changers and for how we're going to feed the world. And the amazing thing is that one of these game changers might be closer than we really have thought thoroughly through. It is here within this diversity of crops. It's amazing what nature has given us.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people in this room obviously are encouraged feeding the world, and people should not go hungry. And I wonder to ask you, is there an imperative for countries like the United States, or leading that have the economic means to lead this crop diversity and food security effort?
If we speak about the U.S., the U.S. is actually our biggest contributor to the endowment. So that is great. It is a challenge for politicians to deal with long-term issues. And that is also one of my strong criticisms with politics. We end up repairing instead of preventing wrong things from happening. And if I have followed the development cooperation for 30, 40 years, and I think what we see, and that trend is extremely strong today, is that the long-term issues are forgotten more and more, and we have a transition of funds from long-term issues to the real short-term issues, to emergencies. We see it very concretely in Europe these days with the refugee crisis in Europe. It is a huge challenge, of course. We see that money is taken from long-term development cooperation, and it's just shuffled over to management of the refugee crisis. And of course, what you do then is that you just increase the problem because you don't contribute where the root of the problem is. You again just repair. And this is a great concern of mine, that we are increasingly unable to fund what is necessary to deal with long-term crisis. But this is where I also think it's extremely important that we involve private sector more. We have developed some very interesting cooperation with a bank in Europe, with Deutsche Bank. We've developed an investment sharing facility with them. We are now working with, just as an example, we are working with World Coffee Research, since we have coffee here. World Coffee Research is now helping us, or they fund the work we do on developing a plan for conservation of coffee. And of course, Starbucks and Lily's and others should fund the conservation of coffee. They base their business on coffee. So of course it's in their interest to make sure that this genetic resource is safeguarded. And I think that is certainly one of the, we can make business concepts and have private sector more and more involved. And this is, it does make me optimistic to see how private sector actually is willing to help out also on what is long-term issues. So now, I come from a part of politics that always have believed in governments, and now I tend to think that maybe I have exaggerated that. Maybe I have to look more into what private sector can do also to solve the long-term issues.
Well, so there's obviously a lot of issues around getting enough funds to be able to make this viable, but what kind of issues do you see with privatization or with working with private entities in regard to profit extraction, or maybe limiting the accessibility down the road for different withdrawals, or any potential problems in regard to that type of pursuit of profits with the private sector?
Yeah, but we should make private sector understand that it is in their interest to safeguard this genetic material. They cannot be permitted to influence the way we work. So we just need to keep strictly to what is our mandate and not allow business to influence our policy development. But I think that can be done because again, you can create business concepts that business understand that is important for them without sort of influencing our way of working.
Definitely. And so you recently have talked about explaining the importance of preserving wild type crops. And I'd kind of like to transition into a conversation around, why are these type crops important, and what are they useful for?
Yeah, what we need is to make sure that we conserve, safeguard in the long-term perspective as much diversity as possible. And you will always have the greatest diversity where a crop has its origin, and where we haven't done breeding in a long time. When you breed, you reduce the genetic diversity within the crop. You breed for increased yields, for example, and that means you turn off other genes and you just develop some traits. And these wild relatives, of course, we haven't fiddled with them. So they are very interesting genetically. They can have all kinds of traits that have been lost in breeding processes in the domesticated species. Now I hear this is a little bit complicated, but the wheat example is, I think, probably the best way of explaining it.
No, definitely, or in regard to coconuts, as you kind of spoke on, there's this also issue around not having any close relatives to this type of thing. So the effects of already losing those gene types, and what can be done to preserve backwards, or is it really just trying to now work against the clock of further degradation of these genes?
It is really to go back to the older varieties, either the wild varieties or what we call the land races, the original ones. Because, let's speak about wheat and continue to speak about wheat. Wheat has its origin around Aleppo, in Syria, in that area. And now, of course, we grow wheat absolutely all over the world. Even in northern Canada, we grow wheat. Two things to say about that. First of all, plants always adopt, and this, now we grow wheat all over the world. Obviously, wheat has adopted. The thing is that it has taken several thousand years to move wheat from Aleppo in Syria to the northern part of Canada. The trouble these days is that the plants are not able to adopt as fast as the climate is changing. That's the fundamental problem. That's why we need to help breed and breed new varieties. But when we breed, and when this wheat has moved from Aleppo in Syria and up to the northern part of Canada, we have lost traits underways. And that is why it's so important to go back to the original varieties, in this case, in the Middle East.
So in regard to these types of traits, and then also the use of them with genetically modified organisms and that kind of context, Norway right now bars the use of genetically modified organisms, but a lot of your funding comes from entities like the Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation, which is heavily in support of GMOs. And I just kind of want to ask, where do you stand, and where, in regard to Svalbard in the future, do you think GMOs have for crop diversity?
We don't take a stand on GM. And because we say that it's up to politicians to decide how to use this genetic material. What we are concerned about is that it is available so politicians can make the decisions they want to make. If we lose this material, we lose options. So we just keep out of that discussion and say, no matter how you decide to use it, we need to have the diversity.
Where do you think that discussion is going in the future?
But can I add one thing?
Oh, yeah, no, go ahead, of course.
Because one thing we do say in addition to that is that if you are concerned about GM, your safest bet is to make sure that we conserve the diversity of these crops. Because we basically think that or my scientists say that within these 200,000 varieties of rice, you could find almost any trait you need.
So independent, though, of what the best decision is, where do you see Norway moving in regard to this type of issue around GMOs, especially in regard to Svalbard being in Norway and having to be under those regulations?
Yeah, no, I don't think Norway will change its position on that. It's a very strong anti-GM attitude in Norway, and that is across the political spectrum. So we will, and we are not permitted to have GM seeds in Svalbard. So that's a clear one.
Well, that's really interesting, especially talking about Svalbard and its role. And why does it exist? It's a backup seed vault. Why do we need a backup? And what makes Svalbard so unique and necessary?
The reason why we need it is that things go wrong around the world. We hope that things don't go wrong, but they do. Like the example from the Philippines, where you had the fire, or you had the tsunami first and then the fire. Like the Iraq example, the whole gene bank was destroyed. And when we lose this material, we lose it forever. When you lose unique material, it's gone. What is gone is gone. What is dead. There's no way we can bring it to life again. What we lose then are these options for your generation, for your children, for your grandchildren again. So it's Svalbard is the safest we have been able to come up with. Up there, you don't have earthquakes, you don't have volcanoes. It is very safe also in terms of the local community. They keep an eye on this. Of course, we have all kinds of security systems up there, so if anybody tries to knock on the door or get in somehow, there are all kinds of alarm systems that will go off. But it's also a very transparent local community. It's damn hard to get up there. It's cold and nasty, so it's not really a place people go to. So it's one of the safest places on earth we've been able to come up with. And Norway was also generous enough to fund the construction of the vault.
And for the sake of time, so that we can get to the audience questions, because I'm sure they have a lot to ask you, but I'd like to kind of just ask, a follow-up in regard to that is, to explain to people in a little context, can you tell them a little bit more about what Svalbard, looks like and why it's so safe and why it's, in the Arctic and a fail-safe program for doomsday scenarios?
Yeah, in addition to it sort of being safe in terms of natural conditions and difficult to get there, etc., the beauty of it is also that it's in the vault is in the permafrost. So in the permafrost you have stable -6 degrees Celsius. Now I haven't changed that to Fahrenheit, but it's pretty cold in there. Year round. Now these seeds, they like to be stored long term in -18. Who can do that calculation? -18 Celsius. That is, well, it's certainly below. It's cold. Let's just say it's
really cold.
It's really cold. It's really cold. So it's easier to cool down in Celsius from -6 to -18 than it would be to cool down from +40 to -18. So it's also in terms of energy, it's also good. And if energy were cut, these seeds would still be safe for a very, very long time. But what it is, it's quite simply, you go in the door you saw there, you saw that portal. You go through the door, then you walk 130 meters straight into the mountains through a tunnel. And then you come into this huge vault that I call the cathedral. I really get that feeling of being in the cathedral when I go in there. There you have a sort of 13,000 years history of agriculture and possibly the future of agriculture. And I get this religious feeling when I am there. It is really unique, and it's just so damn quiet. These seeds don't say much, and there they are. They just sit there on their racks in boxes, and it's just very, very unique. And seriously, it is really the product of the hard work of farmers for 13,000 years.
Yeah, that's amazing and beautiful, and also honestly a little bit scary, like just being alone in the permafrost and just the seeds there to listen to you. But thank you very much for having this conversation with me, Marie. And I'd like to now move on to some audience Q&A and allow people to ask some questions. If you guys could, though, move up to the front of the audience and speak into the mic just for sound issues, that would be really helpful. Thanks.
How does seed dispersal from the bank work? How many seeds can you take out? And if you disperse the seeds, for instance, you mentioned dispersing to Morocco, do they have to give back seeds?
Right. So, in a regular, so we have the Svalbard seed vault. That is a unique construction. That is not meant for distributing seeds. It's purely conservation. But you're right. If we do take seeds out of the vault, we will always construct loops so that seeds also come back to the vault. So now we are growing out these seeds now in Morocco and Lebanon. And when we have the first yields, part of it will go back to Svalbard. But now in these plant gene banks that we have around the globe, the idea is that they do have seeds for distribution. Again, it's not seed museums we're after. We want the material to be used directly by farmers, or most often it is by scientists and breeders. So in these plant gene banks are more than cold storages. They also grow out seeds and make sure that they have a sufficient amount of seeds for scientists and others to use them. But now that we have been upgrading the international gene banks, part of what we've done is to make sure that they do have sufficient seeds available at a given moment, because it does require a lot of work, of course. If you have 125 or if you have 60,000 varieties or if you have 60,000 varieties there, making sure that you have enough copies of these seeds for everybody who wants it at any given time, it's a big job. So it's a lot of processes around a plant gene bank. And again, no point in having them if the seeds are not available.
And actually, our mic is wireless today, so we can move around to you. Just raise your hand after this question. Thank you.
So I know you were asking for the support of third party, basically the corporate world in your seed bank, and I have real trepidation about this. A lot of the seed companies, for instance, Monsanto, have been buying up small seed companies and now hold majority patents and basically own huge swaths of human seeds. Human seeds are now about the rarest seeds there are on Earth and becoming rarer by the day. There used to be something like 80 varieties of wheat commonly traded on the market. Now it's about 5. Are you sure you really want to allow the corporatization of such an intellectually important, human important kind of property? Because I've seen it happen before, that we have allowed corporations to get into this field and basically everyone gets excluded from it afterward. Already what's happening in Europe is things like seed swaps, local seed swaps are being banned. It's coming to this country as well, so that there is actually a collective rebellion happening in terms of people are trying to say, we need to preserve these, and we're finding increasingly that there are laws enacted locally which are inhibiting this from happening. And, you know, the fact that you can't travel with seeds across boundaries because of the affair of infection and transfer of disease, which is an issue. But how do we actually get around that? And how are you going to retain the independence of this, considering corporations have money and money buys power? Power buys everything.
Yeah, well, again, and it's this is the beauty of not being a politician anymore, because we keep strictly to our mandate, which is a conservation mandate. yes, there are tons of things going on in the seed sector and seed industry with seed distribution, etc. That certainly can be discussed. Luckily, I don't need to have a view on that because if I started to have views on that, it would only complicate the work we are set up to do. So we are just single-eyed focused on making sure that we safeguard this genetic diversity. And how these seed systems are developed, it's not really up to us to decide. Again, it's up to the politicians to decide. What I can guarantee, though, is that there is no way even if seed companies were to fund us heavily, which they don't, there is really no option for them to influence our policy because, again, our mandate is quite simply to do the conservation. We have had a little bit of support from DuPont Pioneer. We've had a little bit of support from Syngenta, but that's it when it comes to seed companies. And as of today, 95% of our resources are from governments, and then a little bit from Gates, as you understand, and a few other private donors. But what I really believe in is to create these business cases for the food industry. And again, there's no way they can influence what we do because our only mandate is conservation. And I think that has really, when we are seen as a successful organization, as I think we are, it is also because we just focus on the mandate and there is no mission creep in what we do. But it's interesting for former politicians to sort of just keep out of the political discussion. It's wonderful.
Another question?
Hi, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I was wondering, so you said that a lot of plants don't have seeds, and so you have so it's a gene bank, correct? So how do you go about like growing, like if you had to, right? How do you go about growing more of the crop with just the genetic material?
Yeah. So in these gene banks around the globe, they have lots of land. So the gene bank, the cold storage, is really only a tiny bit of the gene bank. They have lots of land around where they regrow these seeds and duplicate or multiply seeds. So they have systems where they then, depending on what crop we speak about, that they regrow the seeds to make sure that they have fresh seeds, they have viable seeds, and to make sure that they have enough seeds. But from a plant gene bank, you would never get vast amounts of seeds. You would only get a limited amount, and then you would have to regrow it yourself. But there are, it's a fairly complicated system to make sure that you always have viable seeds, that you grow them out when you need to grow them out, and that you also have a sufficient number of seeds available. But Svalbard is then unique, that we operate Svalbard under very different conditions.
So you mentioned that the Crop Trust negotiates with governments to get them to participate in your project. What concerns or hesitations do governments have about partnering with you?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Some countries are concerned that they are robbed of their genetic resources. Certainly several countries in Africa, particularly Africa, have in the back of their heads the history where Western countries have come in and taken their genetic resources without asking or without paying for them. Now, this international treaty for plant genetic resources for food and agriculture was adopted in 2004. So it's a relatively young treaty, and that, as I said, that opens up for exchange of germplasm. provided it's healthy and, all kinds of restrictions on that. But now it's a question whether these wild relatives necessarily go under the treaty. And that is why we want to be on the very safe side and make sure that governments know exactly what they do when they enter into an agreement with us. So we don't take for granted that these wild relatives are a part of the treaty system. That's why we establish these bilateral agreements. And, well, their concern is that, they are sort of robbed for a genetic resource that could potentially give them vast incomes. Under the treaty, there is a system of benefit sharing, but it hasn't worked very well. It's a fairly complicated system. But it's gene robbery they are basically concerned about.
We have time for a few more questions.
So when you distribute some seeds to, say, a national gene bank that has, had a disaster or lost some, is part of that arrangement that they will send you some back to replace what they borrowed, essentially?
Yeah.
Okay, so when it comes back in, how do you verify that it hasn't been genetically tainted? Do you actively compare it, or do you rely on their procedures to ensure that what you get back is actually equivalent to what you sent out?
We don't have any choice but to rely on what they say. And thank heavens, most people certainly working in plant gene banks are very serious about this. They are serious scientists, but we don't have any other choice but to believe what they tell us. Now, with new technology, there might be new possibilities. When we can. My dream is, of course, that we have sequenced, DNA sequenced, every variety of seeds. Then it's also possible for us to know if we have duplications, and that's a few years ago. That wasn't anything you could say. People didn't take you seriously. But today you can say that in the future we probably will be able to DNA sequence every variety of seeds. Opens up completely new, a new world when it comes to what we have in Svalbard. We don't have to have duplications up there. And it certainly opens up a completely new world when it comes to breeding, because we would know what traits these varieties have. As of now, when you breed a new variety, you do thousands and thousands and thousands of crossings. And it's sort of just luck when you find something that works. If we had all this knowledge about these seeds that we potentially can have in the future, we could much easier go to the right variety and start the breeding from there. So today you can say, if you go into a plant gene bank today, it's almost like coming into a supermarket and there are no labels on the cans. So now there are 100,000 boxes of rice there on the shelves, but you don't really know what they contain. The dream is, of course, to know exactly what these 100,000 varieties contain, what traits they have, to have a label on each of these boxes. So then you can say, okay, we have this disease that we need to fight now. Then it's likely that I can go to that box. As of today, we go very widely and just pick randomly almost boxes from the shelf.
Hi, thank you for coming here and speaking with us. I'm just wondering if the trust exclusively distributes to national seed banks, or are there other groups that also have access to the seeds?
Yeah. Now, if we speak about the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, it is actually only the ones that have deposited the seeds that can recall the seeds. So those who deposit the seeds, they own the seeds in Svalbard. So not any scientist could request a sample from Svalbard. The scientist would have to go to the institution that has deposited it to ask to get it. So we do not distribute from Svalbard. It's only those who own it that can distribute the material. Now, in the national plant gene banks, international plant gene banks, anybody can request material. You can go on the internet and hopefully find it out. Well, you can't do that in any gene bank, but in the more advanced one, you can go on the internet, see what they have, and you can request the material. And you should get it.
And now, for the sake of time, we'll have our final question for you, Marie.
Hi, and I don't think you've mentioned this yet, but I just want to make sure. Have you, what is the oldest cultivar that you have in your collection? Do you know by any chance what it is?
Well, it depends a little bit what you mean by that. But we have, in Svalbard, for example, we have land races from the very beginning of agriculture. The funny thing about seeds, of course, is that some of them can live very long. And if you store them correctly. And our scientists, it's not directly an answer to your question, but you know, let's take wheat again. Wheat can survive very, very long, and it's still viable. If everything is done right, from a variety of wheat is collected in the field, it's dried down correctly, blah, 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 and until we have it in the Svalbard Global Seed Vault at -18, wheat is viable after 1,245 years, which is quite cool. So you don't have to regrow that very often if it's treated properly. But if you take lettuce, for example, it's only viable in 55 years. So then you will have to regrow it fairly fast. But to your original question, we have land races in Svalbard and in some of the international gene banks that are pretty much original.
Thank you very much to the audience for your guys' questions. That was really fantastic. And thank you guys for being here. I know a lot of the UC Berkeley campus is asleep right now, given the date. But I really especially appreciate you, Marie, for coming out and having this conversation with us. It was really fantastic. I'd like to now welcome Katja back up to the stage for some closing remarks. And thanks again.
Once again, thank you so much to Marie for coming today. As a token of our appreciation, we would like to give her or present her our commemorative poster.
Oh, that's fun. Thank you. That's very nice.
The Berkeley Forum is hosting one more event this week. It will be on Friday at 1 p.m. in 229 Dwinell Hall with Turkish author and New York Times contributor Mustafa Akyol, who will be discussing liberal interpretations of Islam. Thank you all for coming tonight. Have a good day.
Thank you so much. That
Thank
was
you.
really wonderful.